Begin this hour in Russia, where it is Victory Day, a day that traditionally marks the Soviets defeating the Nazis in 1945. But this year is also meant a show of support for the war in Ukraine, with Vladimir Putin essentially conflating the two during his big speech.
I address our armed forces now and the militiamen of Donbass. You are fighting for your motherland, for its future, so that nobody will forget the lessons of the Second World War, so that there will be no place in the world for punishers and Nazis.
Here's the lesson of World War II. Invaders, they go up against a strong and determined country that knows the terrain, that knows the battlefield. The invaders get pushed back. It happened to Nazi Germany when they went into Russia in June of 41, and it's happening to Russia right now.
So this Victory Day included a giant parade, as you can see, roughly 11,000 Russian troops marching alongside tanks and nuclear missile launchers. That demonstration of military strength comes at the same time we've seen Russia's weaknesses exposed by Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also marked Victory Day, reminding the world that 1 in 5 Ukrainians also died in World War II. And this morning, he said his people are once again on the right side of history. He said, quote, "We will never forget what our ancestors did in World War II, which killed more than 8 million Ukrainians. Very soon there will be 2 victory days in Ukraine," he says, "and someone won't have any. We won then, we will win now." And this morning, Ukrainian soldiers are still fighting in the bunkers and tunnels beneath that Mariupol steel plant, holding out despite waves of attacks by Russian warplanes, tanks, and artillery. The fighters who have remained inside have rejected repeated Russian deadlines to lay down their arms. One soldier insisted, quote, "Surrender for us is unacceptable." One piece of good news: the last of the civilians who were trapped in that steel plant have now been evacuated. Roughly 175 people from Mariupol, including 40 who had been inside that plant for weeks, arrived in Ukrainian-controlled territory on Sunday. In all, about 600 people were evacuated from Mariupol in the past 10 days. And what stories they must have to tell. Russia is stepping up a barrage of attacks against civilians across eastern Ukraine. The Ukrainian military says Russian troops have shelled more than a dozen villages in the Donetsk region over the past 24 hours. Among the facilities that were hit, a medical facility, a poultry farm, and several residential buildings. All of that follows a devastating attack on a school that was being used for a shelter. Roughly 90 people were hiding in the school's basement when it was hit. 60 of them are believed to have died in the attack.
Let's bring in right now retired 4-star General Barry McCaffrey. He's an NBC News military analyst.
Also with us, Mary Elise Sarati, a professor at Johns Hopkins University and a post-Cold War historian. Thanks to you both for being with us this hour.
So, General, let's begin with you. This war began on February 24th. Here we are on Victory Day, May 9th. What does Vladimir Putin have to show for his 8-9 weeks of war in Ukraine?
Well, that speech by Putin marks a man who's run out of ideas. He's in a strategic disaster. Economic sanctions, he's a pariah state. His military's done extremely badly. Undisciplined, cruel, violent battalion combat teams. He's lost, by some estimates, 25% of his combat power that he put into the Ukraine. It's now absorbed half his air force, 60% of his ground forces, and he's got almost nothing to show for it. The war's not yet decided. U.S. and NATO technology being delivered to these incredible Ukrainian fighters is going to make a difference. But I think in the long run, economic sanctions has got to collapse the Russian economy for Putin to back off his fixation on absorbing Ukraine back into Mother Russia.
So, General, as you look at what's happened in the first phase of this war, you look at Russian problems with logistics, with morale, with the fact that their weaponry is just third-rate compared to the Western weapons that are pouring in, the NATO weapons that are pouring in. How in the world does he ever secure the land bridge between Russia and Crimea? And by the way, this isn't jingoism. I'm trying to look at the past and figure out what happens over the next 10 weeks. I just don't see how he takes and holds land if the dynamics remain as they are. You know this so much better than any of us. What do you see going forward?
Well, look, clearly the defense is stronger than the offense in this case. The Russians have not been able to maneuver. They were defeated north of Kyiv. Kharkiv, they're now pushing the Russians back. The offensive from the east has been stagnant. And even in poor Mariupol, these beleaguered Ukrainians are still fighting on. However, Russia is an artillery army, and they've got an air force that's 5 times that of the Ukraine. So we're going to see the continued destruction of civilian infrastructure and massive loss of life as long as Putin can keep it up. I don't think the manpower differential with the Russians is enough to pull this off in terms of conquering the entire country. I don't see that happening. I also don't think I can understand how it ends. Putin will never give up his long-range plans. But look, Joe, I would assert how wars start are normally by miscalculation. How they end is even more important. So I'm firmly convinced we can't leave Putin with a notion that he won on anything. This has to be a disaster for him. Ukraine will never be safe while Putin's the dictator in Russia.
That's a great point.
Yeah, agreed. Professor, let's talk about the new Cold War that you've written about. I remember growing up in a family whose father was a Cold Warrior. We all were. I remember going to college and being surprised to be told that the Soviet Union, that the Soviet Politburo was conservative with a small c. That they didn't, and Khrushchev was always used as a perfect example. If they thought somebody was unstable, they would take somebody out of power, like they took Khrushchev out of power. This new Cold War that we're entering, you've written very persuasively that we're lacking those guardrails. Explain why this may be so much more dangerous, the new Cold War, than the old.
Yeah, we've spun back up to Cold War-like conditions in a breathtakingly short period of time. What we're going to have to call the old Cold War evolved over decades. I'm actually right now in Berlin, actually in a castle outside of Berlin, for a conference about how Europe went from World War II into the Cold War. The woodwork you see behind me is hundreds of years old. And the Cold War evolved over decades, but now all of a sudden here we are in a matter of weeks, and we don't have, as you rightly said, the guardrails. We don't have the arms control agreements that were negotiated. The number of military-to-military contacts that we had in the 90s are gone. We've closed consulates. There's only one treaty that still binds Washington and Moscow, the New START treaty, and it expires in 2024, and I'm not holding my breath for it to be renewed. So it's worrying that we have this kind of these scenes that we're seeing now, these images from the past, but we don't have the guardrails or the safeguards that we had back then.
There's so many, Professor, striking lines in history, though. My mother, 90 years old, was run out of Czechoslovakia during World War II. And she's having flashbacks now. I can't even have her watch the news because it's so vividly similar. Can you talk about how many similarities we are seeing here to World War II, to 1939, to refugees and what they're going through?
Yeah, it's been surreal for me as a historian. I know images like
bet.
this, but I know them from historic footage. And it's surreal to me to turn on Morning Joe and to turn on MSNBC and see it in real time. I have a hard time believing it. I mean, one of the reasons why Putin is having to lean into the history of a victorious past so much is because he hasn't got a victorious present or a victorious future. And so he is intentionally reviving these images of past glories and past successes because the truly brutal war in Ukraine is going so badly, and because the Ukrainians are resisting so fiercely. I have to express my admiration for them.